Chapter 7 of Yudhhaanantha Parva. Radheya was my son. Dhritarashtra appointed Vidura, Sanjaya and Dhaumya to make all arrangements for the cremation of the great heroes who were lying on the battlefield. It was all over soon. Yudhishthira, accompanied by Dhritarashtra and all the others, turned towards the banks of the river Ganga to offer the funeral oblations to the dead. They were all there, also Gandhari, Kunti, and Draupadi. Now the men laid aside all their jewels and silks. They were wearing the simplest of cloths. Their immense chests were covered by thin upper cloths. The dismal procession wended its way slowly towards the banks of the river Ganga. Kunti's condition was pitiable. 3 days back, Radheya was killed by her Arjuna. There was great celebration in the Pandava camp. She had heard about it from Sanjaya. When Sanjaya was telling Dhritarashtra about the war, about the death of Radheya, she heard it. Her heart was burning with grief. She could not tell anyone about it. She could not talk about the wound in her heart. She had to be silent. Today, on the battlefield, she saw the dead form of her firstborn. She would not allow herself to faint. Krishna was watching all the while. She looked at Radheya and she saw his wife weeping over her lord. She saw that too, and still she did not speak. Now, at the end of all this, she was walking with all of them to see the funeral oblations paid on the banks of the sacred river Ganga. It was the same Ganga who took her son away from her years back. Still Ganga flowed as placidly as she did on that memorable day when she set the wooden box afloat on the bosom of the river. It looked like yesterday. Kunti was watching the men give their final offerings to the departed souls. Radheya had no son to do it for him. They were all dead. He was still an orphan as he was on the day she had abandoned him. Her heart was ready to burst with a great sorrow. She burned with self-condemnation for the great injustice she had done to her child. Kunti squared her shoulders. She set her lips in a firm line. She had to do it. She owed at least this to Radheya. She walked with firm steps to her son Yudhishthira. Yudhishthira had just finished his offerings to the sons of Draupadi and all the others. Arjuna's tears were still in his eyes. He had just made the offerings for his dear beloved son Abhimanyu. Now Kunti would do something which would make all this pale into just nothing. She went to Yudhishthira and placed her hand on his back. He turned round and said, "Yes, mother, what is it? Why do you call me?" Kunti had to swallow hard to prevent a sob from escaping her lips. She said, "There is still another person left. You have to make the offerings for him. Also, my son." Yudhishthira looked at her. Her eyes were red with unshed tears. All the people who had assembled there paused and looked at the scene between mother and son. The brothers of Yudhishthira crowded around them and stood with their brows knit to guess who this other person could be. Krishna, the one man who knew, stood and watched Kunti with great compassion in his eyes. She had kept the secret well. She had not announced it during the war. She was silent even after Radheya died, because it would have broken the heart of Yudhishthira. He would have stopped fighting and gone back to the forest. What Kunti was doing now was the right thing. Krishna listened. Yudhishthira said, "One person more? I do not understand. I remember the dead only too well. Surely I am not such an ingrate as to forget those who died for me. Who is this person to whom an offering by me is due?" Kunti said, "It is Radheya. You must make the offerings for him too." Yudhishthira was astounded. He said, "Radheya? But mother, why should I do it for Radheya? He is a Sutaputra. The funeral rites must be performed by his father since his sons are dead. I am a Kshatriya. Why do you ask me to do it for a Suta? For Radheya, the Sutaputra, our arch enemy, why should I do it, mother? Please tell me, why do you look so unhappy? A moment passed. Kunti was dumb with the agony in her heart. She took a deep breath and said, Yudhishthira, you must do it because Radheya is a Kshatriya and not a Sutaputra. Not a Sutaputra? Radheya, not a Sutaputra? Shouted all of them. All at the same time. The cry was taken up by everyone there. Radheya was a Kshatriya. Radheya was not a Sutaputra. Everyone was amazed to hear it. Yudhishthira said, But mother, you knew not a thing about Radheya. How do you know that he is a Kshatriya? Then you must know who he is. Why should I offer the funeral oblations for Radheya? I am puzzled by your words. Tell me, mother, who was the father of the great Radheya? Kunti said, Radheya was the son of Surya. Radheya's mother was a young girl. Surya gave her this child. It was born with the kavacha and the kundalas. His mother was afraid of the censure of the world. You see, she was a maiden in her father's house. So she had to keep the secret buried in her heart. She placed the child in a wooden box and set it afloat on this same river, this Ganga. The child was taken up by Atirata and he gave it to his wife Radha. That is how he got the name Radheya. And that was the name he loved. He would not take any other name. His mother was a princess. She did this injustice to her firstborn. She has several children, but her heart is empty because of this. Yudhishthira and all the others were listening to this recital. Everything else was forgotten in the excitement of listening to the wonderful story. Yudhishthira said, Mother, who is the mother of Radheya? Who is that woman who was so heartless that she could abandon her child in the great river Ganga the moment it was born? Who is the woman who ruined the life of that great man? You must be knowing her since you are telling us all the details of the crime. Who is she, mother? All eyes were turned on her. Kunti looked at all of them. She looked at Krishna. He was looking at her with infinite pity in his eyes. Kunti looked straight into the eyes of Yudhishthira and said, That woman is still alive. I am that woman. Radheya was my son, my firstborn. She fell down in a dead faint. Vidura hurried to her side, even as he did on the day of the tournament when she fainted at the sight of Radheya. Yudhishthira could not think at all. He stood staring at all of them. He kept repeating, Radheya is my elder brother and we have killed him. He looked at Arjuna. Arjuna rushed to him. He cried out, What have I done, my lord? What have I done? How can I live after this? I have killed my brother. My brother, I have killed him. Arjuna could not stand up. He sat down on the ground and he was shouting as one bereft of his senses. I have killed my brother and I have gloated over my brother's death. He fell down in a faint. Krishna came to him and Yudhishthira. Yudhishthira's grief was dreadful. He was trembling like a man with an ague. His eyes became bloodshot. Bhima sat down beside Arjuna. He was too stunned to think. He was like a child which had suddenly become old. Bhima thought of the day of the tournament. He remembered the moment when he had just discovered that Radheya was a Sutaputra. Bhima had said, Listen, you a Sutaputra, are not fit to be killed by Arjuna. You are not fit to hold a bow in your hand. Get thee hence and take up a whip which will suit you better. Bhima remembered Duryodhana's words. He had said, As for this young man, it makes me pity you for your lack of understanding. He is full of the qualities that are found in a Kshatriya and only in a Kshatriya. Can you not see that a tiger can never be born of a poor, meek deer? Can you not feel that he is a Kshatriya? I have made him king of the Angas, but I know that he does not deserve this. He deserves to be lord of the entire world. He is born to be great. You are not good enough or great enough to recognize him. Duryodhana's words burned into his mind now. Yes, they were not great enough to recognize the greatness of Radheya. Bhima was sobbing as if his entire frame were shattered. He could not speak a word. There was dumb misery and nothing else. Nakula thought of the duel he fought with Radeya. He remembered the words of Radeya. He had said, "Someday you will be proud of this duel you fought with me. Someday you will be proud of the fact that Radeya insulted you." Yes, that moment of humiliation would now be the most treasured moment in his life. It was not possible for Sahadeva to forget Radeya and his fight with him. He was remembering the sneer on his lips and his unruffled manner. The Pandavas were prostrate with grief. Kunti was revived with water and other things. For the first time in his life, Yudhishthira did not pay any attention to his mother. He could not look at the women who had done this injustice to Radeya and to the Pandavas. He went and sat with Arjuna and Krishna. Yudhishthira remembered the day when Radeya died. He remembered every moment of the day. He remembered calling Radeya Sutaputra. Yudhishthira turned to his mother. He asked her, "Did Radeya know about it? Did he know who he was?" "Yes," said Krishna. Yudhishthira turned his eyes on Krishna. All the Pandavas looked at Krishna. "Did you know about it, Krishna?" asked Yudhishthira. "Yes," was the reply. It was not possible for them to speak a single word after that. Radeya knew that he was not a Sutaputra. He knew that he was the son of Surya and Kunti, and yet he allowed his own brothers to taunt him with that name. Yudhishthira beat his head in futile anger. He said, "When I heard that Radeya was dead, I ran to the battlefield to see if he was really dead. I was so happy to see him dead. Mother, how could you do this to us, loving us as you did?" It was only now that Yudhishthira saw his mother's face. She looked so unhappy. He did not want to speak a word more. She had suffered enough. Yudhishthira went and stood on the banks of the river Ganga. It looked as though the funeral oblations were being paid with just the tears of Yudhishthira. The death of Abhimanyu and the death of the sons of Draupadi were forgotten in this great calamity which had befallen them. They had killed their brother. That was the only thought that was in their minds as the Pandavas came away from the banks of the river Ganga. The procession wended its way towards the city. Gandhari, Kunti, and Draupadi were sharing the same grief. They had lost their sons and they were inconsolable. Krishna walked along with them. He left them all to their grief. Krishna and Satyaki were walking a few steps behind the procession. Shri Krishna Arpanamastu. Chapter 8 of Yudhhaanantha Parva, Yudhishthira's unhappiness. They had to stay away from the city for the duration of a month. They could not go back to the city until the funeral rites had been performed. All of them stayed in temporary houses built on the banks of the Ganga. Vyasa, Narada, and many other rishis came to see Yudhishthira. Narada spoke to him. He said, "Why are you plunged in woe? By the grace of Krishna and with the help of your valiant brothers and the Panchalas, you are now lord of the world. Your years of suffering are ended. I am happy to offer you my felicitations on your success." Yudhishthira's grief broke out. He said, "My lord, I am not destined to be happy. All the happiness that ought to have been ours is gone because we have been told by our mother that Radeya was our brother. How could this have been allowed to happen? My mother tells me that she met him once before the war. She asked him to come to her and to his brothers, but he would not. Krishna had asked him, but he would not let down his friend and master Duryodhana. Depending on Radeya, he had begun the war. It was against the nature of my brother to be disloyal to his king and master and friend. He suffered agonies when he knew that the Pandavas were his brothers, but he would not swerve from the path of duty. Such a man was our brother, and we have killed him. I was happy when he was killed. I called him a Sutaputra when I fought a duel with him. He defeated me and he insulted me. What dread fate is this, my lord, that separated him from us? He knew all the time that I was his brother and he did not want to let us know. I remember the day in the court in the Hastinapura. Draupadi was being insulted by all of them, by Radheya more than the others. I was wild with him. I was standing with my head hung down in shame. I turned my eyes towards him. I could not look up. I just looked at his feet and all my anger vanished. I could not be angry with him. His feet were like the blessed feet of my mother. I was intrigued by the resemblance. For years I have always remembered this and again and again. I have tried to solve this teasing problem. How could the feet of Radheya, the Sutaputra, resemble those of my mother? My lord, when I realize now why his feet were like those of my mother, my heart is ready to break into a million flinders. How can I be happy after killing this great man? This Radheya who should have been the lord of this Kuru kingdom? I cannot find any solace in anything. My mother tells me that he gave her a boon of his own accord. He told her that he would not kill any of the Pandavas except Arjuna. He just had to fight that duel with Arjuna. That was the only way he could please Duryodhana. I now realize why he did not kill Bhima on the day when Jayadratha fell. He had Bhima at his mercy. He went away without killing him. But he had to insult him. That night he met Sahadeva in a duel. The next day Nakula. On the last day of his life, he met me in a duel. We were all allowed to leave. He did not kill us because he would not. What a noble and loving brother we had. And Arjuna killed him when he was not ready to fight. I can never forgive myself for this outrage. We have been the most unrighteous people that fought in the war. Narada comforted him. He said that Radheya could not have been killed by anyone. It was the curse of two Brahmins and the interference of Indra that made the killing of Radheya possible. He told the Pandavas the story of Radheya's life in the full detail of all its tragic splendor. It was the story of a noble soul which purified all those who were fortunate enough to have been associated with him. It chastened the Pandavas. It made them humble. It made them realize that the ways of providence are mysterious, but the grief never left their hearts. It was a raw wound which would never heal. Yudhishthira could never forgive his mother for the injustice done to Radheya and to all of them. He cursed all womanhood. He said that no women would be able to keep secrets from then on. It was because Kunti kept the secret so well that this calamity had happened. There was no way of comforting the Pandavas. Yudhishthira lost all interest in the kingdom that they had won after so much pain and bloodshed. He almost decided to abandon everything and go back to the forest. It was possible to convince him that it was a wrong attitude. He would sit and mourn the death of all those who had been killed in the war. He blamed himself for everything now. Bhima, Arjuna, Nakula, Sahadeva, Draupadi all tried so often to convince him that his attitude was wrong, that he should not be so depressed, but it was all to no purpose. They were nearly desperate. Yudhishthira was sunk in woe. Vyasa, Narada and so many others made him realize that it was all wrong. Yudhishthira began to throw off the mantle of sorrow gradually. It was not easy for Vyasa to change his attitude, but finally Yudhishthira came to realize his duty as a king. He was made to see that a man who is a king has no right to his personal griefs. He belonged to the people. He was not allowed to have an individuality of his own. To the people, the king was God, but to the king, his subjects represented God. Wow, wow, wow. To the people, the king was God, but to the king, his subjects represented God. It was his duty to rule them well. Beyond that, a king had no existence. He had to live just for the sake of the people. He must be a father to them. It was their due. Yudhishthira realized all this. He said, "My mind is not clouded anymore, my lord. I have passed through the dark valley and have come out into the sunlight. Please teach me the rules of conduct that a king should follow. Please tell me the rules of governing a kingdom. I do not know many of these things. It is up to you all to guide me in the right path. I have taken upon myself this great responsibility. I must know everything about ruling the kingdom. I want to do it as well as my ancestors did. Please teach me. Vyasa smiled happily and said, Yudhishthira, I am happy to see you take so much trouble about the ruling of the kingdom. It is laudable. But you are asking the wrong person. I am a man who has never ruled. I am one who has nothing to do with the kingdom on the earth. I am ignorant in these matters. I suggest that you ask your grandfather. He is the greatest authority on these matters. Ganga, when she took him with her, wanted to fit him for the role he was to play, a king of the lunar race. He was to have succeeded Shantanu. He was taught political science by Brihaspati and Shukra, the divine preceptors. There is no one to equal Devavrata in this. He was fitted out to play a role which he could never play, thanks to the selfishness of his father. He has never had a chance to tell anyone about all that. Devavrata has lived in heaven before he came down to the earth. He has been in the company of gods. I will tell you the greatness of your grandfather. Brihaspati was his tutor in political science. Ganga, the favorite of the gods, is his dear mother. They took so much trouble to make the son of Ganga well versed in all that a king should know. Shukra, the guru of the gods and the asuras, taught him the rules of conduct. Bhargava was his tutor in archery. The Vedas and the Vedangas were taught to him by Vashishta. As for his knowledge of renunciation, Markandeya taught him that. Devavrata knows the secret beyond the wheel of death. It will be your good fortune if you can hear the great Bhishma talk on all these things. He will be happy to tell you. Nothing will please a teacher so much as a willing and humble disciple. Go now to that great man and ask him. Go to Bhishma, who has been up spending his last days on a bed of arrows. Yudhishthira said, My lord, how can I go and stand in the presence of the great man? I am the cause of the destruction of my cousins. Having committed such a sin, how can I have the courage to enter his presence? Krishna said, Do not be so sensitive about what happened. Yudhishthira, it is known to all that fate was responsible for this and not you. Go to Bhishma. Listen to the words of Vyasa. It is for the good of the kingdom which you are to rule for many years more. Bhishma is a great man. He knew the future of the Kauravas. Do not have any doubts about it. Listen to Vyasa. Taking the advice of all of them, Yudhishthira decided to go to his grandfather for instructions on how to rule his kingdom. Shri Krishna Arpanamastu. Chapter 9 of Yudhhaanantha Parva, the crowning of Yudhishthira. The month was over. They could now go back to Hastinapura. The mind of Yudhishthira had realized peace. He was not unhappy anymore. The days and nights he had spent with the wise rishis had given him shanti, peace which he had been longing for all these years. He now understood the true value of things. His mind was cured of the fever of unrest and he was happy. A sensitive man like Yudhishthira could not reconcile himself to ruling the kingdom which he had won after wading through a river of blood, the blood of his cousins. It was only after the comforting company of the great rishis that he realized his real position. He was happy now. He was almost looking forward to taking up the duties of a ruler. Yudhishthira wanted to fit himself for this role. The suggestion of Vyasa appealed to him. He decided to leave for Hastinapura. They all set out for the capital city. With the old king Dhritarashtra in the lead, they began their journey to the city. It was a magnificent procession. The city was reached soon. The people saw the new king Yudhishthira in a chariot drawn by 16 white bullocks. Bhima was holding the reins in his hands. Arjuna was holding the white umbrella over his head. Nakula and Sahadeva were holding the chamaras on either side of the king. It was a splendid spectacle. The people had time to forget their recent woe. A month had gone by. They were happy to welcome the king to Hastinapura. In a chariot following that of the king Yudhishthira was seated Yuyutsu, the only surviving son of Dhritarashtra. This was followed by the chariot of Krishna, who had Satyaki with him. The women of the royal house were carried in palanquins carried by bearers. There was a grand and impressive procession of horses and many elephants and footmen. It was a happy day for everyone. It was a happy day for everyone. Yudhishthira, preceded by Dhritarashtra and followed by the others, entered the magnificent Sabha of the Kuru kings. He was honored by all the citizens and Brahmins who recited verses blessing the Pandavas. Krishna led Yudhishthira to the throne. Krishna seated him on the illustrious throne of the Pauravas. Krishna's eyes were raining tears. So nice. Krishna's eyes were raining tears. His promise had been fulfilled today. He had taken an oath that he would place Yudhishthira on the throne, and he had achieved this great task. Jeweled seats were placed facing the throne. Satyaki and Krishna took their seats. Bhima and Arjuna seated themselves on either side of the king. On ivory seats by the side of these brothers were seated Nakula and Sahadeva. Kunti was seated along with Sahadeva, her favorite child. They shared the same seat. Individual seats were provided for Dhritarashtra and Gandhari. Vidura and Yuyutsu were seated by their side. The king had been crowned. There were musical instruments making sweet music. The Brahmins chanted the Vedas. It was a thrilling moment. The chief men of the city came to the presence of the king and spoke formal words of welcome. Yudhishthira was looking like the moon in the midst of stars. He replied in suitable terms and then spoke. He said, "I have been greatly honored by the citizens. I will try to the best of my ability to be a good king. I am hoping that my uncle will still be the king as he has been all these years. He is our father. He is the father of this kingdom. I will be just his servant and I will try to assist him in ruling the kingdom. My brothers will all help me." Yudhishthira dismissed all the citizens after honoring them duly. Yudhishthira crowned Bhima as the Yuvaraja, the heir apparent. Vidura was appointed the minister. He had the charge of the defense of the kingdom. He was also the personal counselor to the king. Sanjaya was made to take charge of the finance of the government. Nakula was to take charge of the army and its maintenance. Arjuna was the commander of the army. He was in charge of foreign affairs. He had to defend the kingdom from foreign invasions. Dhaumya continued to be the high priest. Sahadeva was the personal protector of the king. He had to be with him always. Yuyutsu was asked to manage the several provinces and also to attend to the personal wants of the old king Dhritarashtra. Krishna was watching with admiration the efficiency of the king. Shri Krishna Arpanamastu.